Hi there. My name is Abil Beckford, and I started the One Problem podcast. We know that there are tons of problems in the world, but why overwhelm ourselves? Let's tackle them one problem at a time. You know that most of my guests, I have some prior relationship with them. And that's the case with our guest, Jackie Lyles. I met her on LinkedIn. Now, she's a very fascinating person. She inspires sales teams to increase their revenues. She's a TEDx speaker and author, and a whole lot more. But you'll get the opportunity to learn more about her. So over to you, Jackie.
Thank you. Thank you, Abel. The one problem I'm going to talk about today is finding new opportunities. And I'll go into the solution. So there's really three things you want to focus on the solution in finding new opportunities. The first is be curious. And what I mean by being curious is everything that you see, everything that you do, imagine how it could be done differently. I got this idea from actually a philosophy professor, Dr. James McDermott, and he was a specialist on William James, who's the father of modern psychology. And McDermott would say, drive to this class differently, walk a different path, smell a different fragrance, do something different every time, rearrange your furniture. And I thought about my life. And at the time, I was in college, I was 19. It was easy to rearrange my furniture. I had very little. and in my world, I could try a lot of different things. And the one thing that he did not talk about, which I found very effective in my consulting practice and in my business, is to talk to new people. We work with Fortune 100 companies and many, many entrepreneurs. And what we found is that they talk to the same people. They go back to the same clients. They surround themselves, they're insular with the same people that gave them the same information 10 years ago. And what happens is you literally run out of ideas. This came from a guy I worked with, Jim Norman. He was one of my mentors. He was the brother-in-law of Zig Ziglar, and he was a character. And Jim was just a larger-than-life person. He was a very successful developer, and he mentored entrepreneurs and helped them start to think about things differently. And he said that people just run out of the same conversation, and they just replay it again and again and again. So solving this situation of finding new opportunities, you want to be curious, talk to new people. And then the third thing is ask questions of new people. And when I think about the new people, I always think about business champions, people who could influence 300 people, someone who could make a decision, someone who is always developing yourself and learning. It's someone who's probably reading a lot of books that you talk about. That person, they're going to be asking you, ask questions of that person, and you will learn things. And there are 5 questions that I always ask, and I found this to be very helpful, is what are your responsibilities you're focusing on right now? What's your biggest challenge? Imagine working together on that big challenge. What would it look like to you? How will you measure it? And what would it do for you personally when that challenge would go away? What people tell me, it's like one guy I worked with, Jay Manning, he said, I'm telling you things I've never said out loud. He was an executive with Stewart and Stevenson, and then they were acquired by GE. And the big example is people think about the same situation the same way, So when you ask questions of new people, you're going to hear things you've never heard before. You may even yourself say things you've never said. And that will open up new opportunities. And I'll give you some examples of how this works. One is with an energy services company. We had been working with them. They had significant turnover. And I brought in a person that was very famous for doing management training. So he came in and we talked to the energy services company. And what we found is they never considered someone outside of their industry to look at how to solve this problem. And what happened is they immediately engaged this person. They bought $5 million of management training. But what it changed is the lives of the people out in the field, because the managers became more aware of what they were doing to get people to leave. And they didn't know that. So they changed their behavior. Another example is with a very small company. So I know some of your listeners have small companies. So I'm going to talk about a small company and how you can take it in a big way. And this particular example, this was an author that had a small practice. He was a psychologist and he'd written a book, and his book was on teams. And he asked me to get his book out there. And so what we did is we found chambers of commerce, so many different groups that wanted to look differently at the situation. They'd never considered bringing in a psychologist to talk about teaming. They'd always brought in business people or entrepreneurs. So this was very different. And for him, he got to launch his business, his consulting business, because he would go out and speak and immediately people would hire him. And what we did is we partnered with independent bookstores. He'd never worked with independent bookstores. So he became a New York Times bestseller out of that work after 6 months of work. He was number 4 on the New York Times bestseller list for 14 weeks. So that was very rewarding for us. And just to let you know that just asking these questions can change things. They're in my book, Own Your Value, and you can get it on Amazon. So that's the situation. That's how to, the one problem I see are finding new opportunities, be curious, talk to new people, and ask questions of new people. So back to you, Abel.
Thank you so much. You've given me a lot of food to think about, because I always say to people, try something different. Don't go to the same places, like try different foods and stuff, but you have taken it a level deeper. So thank you so much for that.
You're welcome. Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you and your audience.